a little bit about myself. I'm not sure how much you've shared. I am a author. I've written a couple of books, but probably more important than being an author, I think it's kind of why I actually ended up being an author. A lot of it has to do with just being very curious. I've always been, as I would describe myself, as a bit of a brand nerd. I'm very interested in how people form, I guess, emotional attachments and intimate relationships with items or things known as brands. They obviously form with people, but they also form with brands. I mean, there are certain brands we actually, fall in love with, and we develop relationships with, and we have a certain degree of excitement or expectation in interacting with those brands. And sometimes in using those brands, they are a reflection upon our values or who we are or who we want to become or who we belong to. And I've always been very curious about how those relationships are created, and actually, just as importantly, how do you maintain them, and actually how do you protect those relationships. I feel like those of us who've had the opportunity to create brands, which almost all of us do. I mean, we do it on a personal level. You have your own personal brand. The podcast is part of this. This podcast is part of that. But everything you're doing, your company, the TBS, all that is all part of who you are. Mm-hmm. And people have a relationship with you, but they also have a relationship with the brand persona that you've been able to create. Likewise, there's a lot of brands out there that I have strong relationships with. My favorite car brand, I mean, everyone loves cars, right? My favorite car brand is Porsche, and why do I have such a strong affinity to that brand? And so, and then many of us in business, we are actually caretakers of our business and of the brand that the business has. And I feel like it's really important that as caretakers of the brand, we don't give our customers or our consumers any reason to fall out of love with those brands. I think it's really important for us to make sure that those people that have engaged with the brand, that they stay in love with the brand, that they're never on the fence about their love for the brand. And so, that is our job, is to make sure that people are all in with their relationships with the brands that we create. So I've always been curious about that. And I was an engineer background, and the engineering part of me helped, at least from an analytical point of view, recognize different patterns. And so, in the various jobs I've had throughout my career, I've recognized different patterns. A lot of them were born on the fact that, I would do things, and sometimes it'd take me 2 or 3 attempts before I could get it right. In other words, I had a lot of failure to get to a better positive outcome. And that also born a lot of curiosity into, how do I guess, make things better or easier for myself, and obviously for other people. And I've always treated myself sort of as this idea of a working prototype. And so this curiosity to improve, self-improvement or career improvement or work improvement, whatever type of improvement. So this curiosity of how brands work and this curiosity of how to make the world better or make myself better, those two were probably the key motivations in terms of why I became an author. Yeah. Mainly because in my journey to figure things out for myself, because I made so many mistakes, I came across patterns. I noticed that these 4 companies or 5 companies kind of do things the same way. They maybe call it something else, but literally it's like the same idea. And is that a strategy, a set of choices that they've made? Is it certain principles and values that they hold dear and they follow? And then does that manifest into certain best practices that include tactics and tips and tricks and techniques that I could learn from? And in the spirit of trying to recognize patterns, I write them down. I realized, maybe I didn't bring anything new to the world, but I saw some stuff of the world that maybe I could share with others so that they wouldn't make the same mistakes that I made. And that's been the primary motivation and why I write the books. And so the first book really is looking at, why do certain brands have, the ability to stand the test of time? So these are brands that have been relevant not only today, but they're of course relevant before, yesterday, but they're going to be even relevant tomorrow in the future. And so that to me was like, huh. And in the process of having that longevity of being relevant to everybody, how were they then recognized to be the standard bearer for whatever it is that they were known for? And by being the standard bearer for that amount of time and over time, became known as iconic for whatever it is that they were known for. And so it became the whole process of, how do you become iconic? What is it about certain brands that allow them to achieve iconic status? Is it something that happens by accident just because you were able to stand the test of time? Or are there set strategies and principles and best practices that allow you to actually develop brands that do stay timelessly relevant? And so that was the first book, was all about these 50 companies I looked at to understand how they became timelessly relevant and then became the standard bearer for something that they were known for a long time and then became iconic. And so that first book is called Iconic Advantage, and it really just breaks down some of the key principles that are required to create lasting brands. By the way, and then the second book was sort of an outcome of the first book. It was a situation where, it's helping a lot of clients figure out how to make their brands and what I call create iconic advantage for them, because the brands that tend to be iconic in whatever category they're competing in tend to be 10 to 100 times more profitable than those competitors who haven't reached iconic status. If you're the standard bearer, if people know you as a reference brand, you're going to get probably over 60-70% of people automatically going to go to you first without even thinking about it, just because, hey, you're the best known brand, or you created the category, you're known for it. And that makes your marketing job really easy, right? and generally people will probably pay a little bit more than your competitor because they know you, or you're the iconic brand. And so whatever you do it has sort of this Midas touch. You're always going to be more fruitful in your efforts than any of your competitors. And so I talk about how do we create iconic advantage. And then working with clients in terms of how to develop that for them, one of the things that we work on is how do we create signatures? Things that you are known for that remind people about what makes you special. So you have this podcast and you have 500 experts on it. Well, this is one of your key signatures. Along with people knowing who you are, they also know, yes, he's the guy with a cool podcast from Vietnam, from Ho Chi Minh, that reaches across the four corners of the world, and touches all these people, and he's so curious, and he's very welcoming. And that's all part of your persona, but it is manifest in one of your key signatures, which is this podcast. And so what I do is help people try to create those. And they could be everything like, let's take Nike, their Air Jordan, the Nike shoe, right?
Yep.
What's most famous about is the way they have a little air pocket, right, in the sole. And it's been around for 30 plus years, and it's always had different manifestations of having air, the Air Jordans, in the shoe, and that's a signature feature. If you think about colors could become signature. When I say Ferrari, what color do you think of? You think red, right? Yeah. When I think Lamborghini, you probably think yellow. When I say Tiffany, Tiffany, the jewelry company, you think, aquamarine blue, whatever it is, right? So color can be another thing. We have, I know you guys have some great beers over at Ho Chi Minh, but in the U.S. and in North America and Central America, one of the most famous beers is Corona. Yeah. And Coronas are obviously distinctive because they're yellow, but actually they're more distinctive because a Corona is almost naked unless it has a line, a green line in its neck, okay? And why? Because the line is a signature element and reminds you that this is your vacation beer. This is your beach beer. This is the beer you bring to when you are sunbathing in the sun under, on the sand, right? And so that's a signature that reminds you of that. So there's all these different categories of signature elements. One of the most important ones are the idea of signature experiences. And as I was helping companies create signature experiences, what I started to recognize and realize is that most of the world is starting to create bland, almost, how do you want to say this? Bland is probably the right word. Experiences where they were trying to take out all the friction in an experience, all the stuff that makes you have to think or makes you pause or makes you, anything that requires any more extra effort. The current economy is all about trying to make everything frictionless. And as I looked at great experiences, what I started to recognize is experiences that you remember, that you cherish, that you look forward to, actually are experiences that create certain happy chemicals. That includes dopamine, which is this like excitement chemical. Includes oxytocin. That's kind of like the love drug. It's the, when you hug somebody, you feel oxytocin. When a baby gets hugged by the mom for the first time, there's this dose of oxytocin. There's serotonin. That's sort of the reward and the respect drug you get when like you're competing or you get recognized. There's endorphins. That's kind of like a painkiller. That you're running the marathon and it kicks in at the very end, right? You get all these endorphins, and then there's adrenaline. And all these things, when I looked at them in terms of creating great signature experiences, they all required energy, effort, consideration, a certain degree of risk, a certain degree of reward, and our contact, inconvenience. And so I started to recognize, hey, guess what? In creating good experiences, you need to take out the bad friction, but you need to both keep and enhance the good friction. There is a difference between, not all friction is the same. There's bad friction, but there's also good friction. And so those the good friction I talked about, it creates the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the endorphins, and the adrenaline. So that's what the second book is about. It's called Friction, but it's not about how you take away friction. It's actually how you introduce more effort, energy, and actually require both your employees, your customers, your consumers to work harder, okay? Not work easier.
Wow. So thanks a lot for sharing the works that you are doing in about 6 minutes, and I'll need to carry you back in time. Let's figure out how everything started, and we get back to the good friction, and how we're gonna build it later on. All right. So let's travel time. When I was young, I always wanted to become an astronaut. So wearing the suit and jumping in different planets seems cool to me. But life didn't give me any chance, any opportunity to do any works close to what I wanted, right? So I wonder, before you become a brand lover, brand expert, and an international sought author and speaker, what was your dream when you was young? So.
Yeah, I think the first time somebody asked me what I wanted to be is I was at the doctor's office, and this is when I was in second grade, and I had gone to the office because I was playing in the playground with the other kids, and there's at that playground something called a teeter-totter. I don't know if you know what that is, but basically, it goes up and down, and there's a fulcrum in the middle, and one kid jumps up, the other kid goes down, so it goes back and forth, teeter-totter. I don't know if you guys done that okay. Anyway, I was on one end of it, and then 3 kids jumped on the other end just to see how far they could shoot you out. So I went flying out of my teeter and landed on my arm and broke my arm. And so the doctor was putting it on, and I wasn't feeling very well, and I think he was trying to distract me. I think I ended up throwing up, which I then felt so much better, right? But then he asked me, okay, so, I'm sure doctors always do this sort of the bedside manners, they basically, so he asked me, what do I want to be? And I thought, I never thought to answer that. Well, I want to be somebody impressive, and I want to be somebody, that, everyone would look up to. Yeah, I want to be the president of the United States. So that's my answer to it. What no one told me when I was in second grade, I think I was 7 years old, is that I could never be the president of the United States. One, at that time, I still wasn't even a citizen. I was, at that time, I think we held what we call the permanent resident green card, but we did not have citizenship. I didn't get my citizenship until 5 years after that.
Oh.
And the way it works in the U.S. is I can be anything in the U.S. Anything. I could be a senator, I could be a congressman, I could be judge, I could be on the Supreme Court. But the one thing I cannot be legally is the President of the United States. You have to be a naturally born citizen in order to be U.S. President. I think there is one exception. If your parents are U.S. citizens and you're born, let's say where you were given birth in Vietnam, but you held a U.S. resident, I think that's the gray line. But if your parents and you or whoever, right, you were born outside and you came and immigrated, no chance, right? So yeah, that was I learned probably, I don't know, at the civics and government class, maybe in 5th grade, that the dream that I held on to was a pipe dream. That's possible.
So what other dreams did you have for yourself after realizing that you are not able to become the U.S. president? What was the secondary dreams now?
Sure, yeah, I'm sure at some point I wanted to be a rock star or something like that. Whatever. But yeah, I think in high school, it's funny, probably even prior to high school, I had met one of my mom's friend's husband. And in his garage, he didn't park his car there. It was his workroom. And what he had in his workroom is he had all these wires and all these different electronic devices, and he had what he called a solder gun. It's those things that, it's very hot, and then you take this kind of soft metal, you put it against, and then it melds two metals together, and so you solder something together. I thought, whoa, that's so cool, soldering something, right? And he was an electrical engineer. So I thought to myself, yeah, I want to be an electrical engineer because I want to be somebody that could be in the garage, like a mad scientist creating crazy things and soldering stuff together. I always thought that was really cool. So yeah, I thought, hey, it'd be fun to be an electrical engineer. I didn't really understand it. It just was something I saw in my friend's garage. At the same time in high school, I started to develop an interest for fashion. I thought fashion was really interesting as a way of self-expression. Clothes have such a unique impact on our psyche. Depending on what you're wearing, sometimes it changes your mood, it changes your belief about who you are, what you're about, and so I had a real passion for fashion. And in fact, what happened is when I was in high school, I went to high school at a town called Davis, California. It's the bike capital of the world. It's not that big, but there's a famous university there, University of California, Davis. And even as high school, we were allowed to go into the main library, which I did. And I would spend my time in the library researching 1940s and 1950s Vogue magazines, the fashion magazine, Vogue, right? And I'd be looking at, okay, what are the patterns of the 1940s versus the 1950s? What were the fashion trends? What were some of the things that were carried over? What were some of the things that were newly introduced? And I would be using my engineering analytical side to try to understand how fashion evolved between various decades. And again, this is probably when I was 1980s, probably when I was doing this. And so, I was looking at 40 or 50-year-old Vogue magazines to try to decipher, what were the fashion trends. Well, it came time in high school to kind of pick a major and then to apply for colleges. And, I came from a fairly conservative Asian family, and I knew that they were never going to pay for my my schooling in fashion, right? they were not going to pay for that. I knew that, right? So I took the other route, which I was interested in, which was electrical engineering, and so that's how I ended up being an electrical engineer. Again, 10 years prior, because I saw one of my mom's friend's husband working in the garage. And then I spent the next 4 years studying, or 5 years, it took me 5 years actually to graduate with electrical engineering, really trying to do everything that besides engineering. I like the analytical stuff of it, but in between my junior and senior year, I actually worked for 6 months in what they call an internship. They called it a co-op, but anyway, it's an internship, right? And during that internship, I worked for a very cool company called AMD, Advanced Micro Devices. They are now bigger than Intel.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know it. Yeah.
I know
Before,
AMD, yes.
they were always behind Intel. Like, they were always second to Intel, right? And now they're actually bigger than Intel in terms of market cap and success. But back then, I worked at AMD, and I remember I spent those 6 months designing a multi-bus exchange semiconductor. And we used CMOS technology, and I remember I spent a lot of time in the computer room doing simulations and trying to figure out how to build the best circuitry and then lay it out physically on a chip. And, in those 6 months I actually designed the chip, and it actually got produced, and it was a very, good, it wasn't like the biggest chip they ever did, but it was a moneymaker, which was great. A pretty boring chip. It kind of said, okay, here are 4 different inputs. How do you decide which of these inputs of information are you going to take? It was kind of like a very fancy, a stoplight signal. So anyway, I designed that, but in those 6 months, I realized I didn't really interact with that many people. I interact a lot with computers, with a couple other engineers, with some lab technicians, and I said to myself, this is really not for me. I really enjoy people interaction, and this didn't have enough of it for me. And so then, that was between my junior and senior year. My senior year, I decided, okay, I just spent all this time, all this money, almost 5 years of my life, trying to get an engineering degree, and I'm going to interview with everybody who wasn't engineering. So my senior year of college, I was interviewing for jobs, and people were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I don't want to be an engineer, even though I'm going to get my engineering degree. So I interviewed with, I remember one time I interviewed with this grocery store. Grocery store, you buy produce there, you buy, whatever. Called Safeway. It's one of the bigger ones in the U.S., Safeway. So I interviewed for their produce training program. And I got in there and I sat down, and the guy goes, can you name, he goes, are you sure you're in the right interview? HP, Hewlett Packard, is next door. Are you in the right place? I go, yeah, I'm here for the Safeway. Because where I went to school, UC Davis, was a big agricultural school too, along with engineering. And so the guy thought, man, you're in the wrong place. I go, no, I'm here for this. And so one of the questions he asked me was, can you name 7 types and varieties of lettuce? The green lettuce, right? I'm like, there's iceberg, green leaf, butter, and I think that was it. So I could only come up with 3, and I thought, let me just say, I failed that interview so bad. And so anyway, so I interviewed with a wide range of people that were in engineering, and I just happened to be interviewing with one of the big consulting firms. Not a lot of them came to UC Davis. One of them did because the head partner of the San Francisco office also went to Davis as an undergrad. And so I actually landed a job at Bain & Company, which is one of the bigger, kind of like the BCGs, the McKinseys. Yeah, okay. So it's one of those guys. So I got to work at Bain. And so that was my real roundabout way of like saying, hey, between engineering and fashion, I really, went here. I had to practically choose engineering. Then I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. and then I okay, so let me just finish a couple of other things. You'll see how full circle this is. Yeah. So then I worked at Bain for a while. I hated it. I absolutely hated working at Bain because I hated being this young 22-year-old person, and somehow I was asked to be talking to these 40-year-old managers and using, of course we did database analysis and spreadsheets, and we did all this analytics to demonstrate why their product line profitability was needed to be fixed. So we gave all this advice, but as a 22-year-old giving a 40-year-old advice, it felt really inauthentic. It felt, I don't know, it did. I felt, this. I think maybe one of your experts talks about this idea of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Right? Where you feel like an imposter. Oh my God, did I feel like an imposter? Like, here I am telling, sure, I've got some numbers on a spreadsheet and I put them into a pretty graph. But to really tell somebody 40 years old, how to kill the business they like, or, how to like trim off certain and fire certain people, I didn't know anything about ever managing somebody or what it's like to have, people work for me or the team build. And all I could tell them was that this wasn't profitable and you should cut it. Or the strategy says we should do that, not this, And here I was 22 years old with no work experience doing that. So, of course, I felt like an imposter the whole time through. And the problem with being in a company like Bain is you have a lot of smart people there. I mean, truly, they hire some of the smartest people there. And so it exacerbates the imposter syndrome because you feel like you have to put up or put on a certain show and never, ever show weakness or vulnerability in those type of environments. And so it made it even worse. And eventually, Bain kind of said, "You're not for us," and I'm like, "Yes, I'm not for you. You're right." And then I left Bain, and then I did a year of consulting with some clients in Taiwan because I'm Taiwanese, and then I ended up applying to business school during the time, and I ended up going to business school at Stanford. Then after Stanford, I left and I worked for. Because I really wanted to work on a real company that made things and sold them to consumers. Because I wanted to learn about business. So I ended up working at Clorox, and I sold really sexy things like toilet bowl cleaners and stuff like that. And then there's a whole period where I said, okay, now that I've learned a lot about managing toilet bowl cleaners and consumer products, how do I might do that in my own business? So there was a whole period was a big entrepreneur. I've probably done about 7 different startups. Most of them were big failures. A couple were okay, did fine. And I'm trying to keep this full circle for you. After I did the startup, I actually got hired back to Clorox, and they bought one of my startups, which was great. And then I got hired away, of all things, by one of the largest produce companies in the world. Okay, and going back to so this produce company's name was Chiquita. They sell bananas. Okay, but they also sold packaged salads. So we have the world's largest packaged salads called Fresh Express in the U.S. Right? So we have. And now you want me to name 7? I can name 70 different lettuces. Right? So back then I couldn't name 7. I can name all these different varieties, right? Yeah. So it's so funny, right? And then from my work at Chiquita, I got a recruiter call, and they said, "Hey, somebody's looking for help in new ideas and being more innovative and building new innovation capabilities." And they just happen to be a fashion company.
Wow.
So full circle, I finally ended up working for a fashion company called VF. They are one of the world's largest. They are the world's largest apparel company. They own brands like North Face, Vans, Timberland. They recently acquired Supreme. Back then they owned Wrangler, a whole bunch of brands, right? 30 different brands. And from my roots of saying, do I want to be a fashion designer versus engineer, I chose the wrong path, and I spent the next 30 or 40 years getting back on track.
How do you feel getting back on track, decades later?
Well, it's funny. I did a talk for this Asian mentoring group called Jade, and I said, look, a lot of people have very linear careers. Like, let's take a lawyer, or let's take a doctor. It's very clear, how long you have to study, and then you do your internship, and then you're a resident, and then from the resident, you're finally, a practicing doctor, and, that's a very linear path. And law school, same thing, right? I'll go finally be a judge, and maybe get the Supreme Court. But there's this linear, or I'm being a partner in a law firm, all that, right? And I said, that works. But I I recommend this in life. Most people go to college and they choose a major, right?
Mm.
And I'd be interested in what the statistics are, but most of my friends aren't even doing anything related to their major, right?
Yeah.
And for me, college was most important about, hey, you meet people, you learn how to live independently without your parents taking care of everything or your family taking everything for you. And it's the first time in your life where you're actually given a myriad, a whole range of options that you now have to decide. Am I going to do this? I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, there are consequences to choices, and choices are plentiful, and it's all up to you. But okay, what I was trying to say is, I got a little sidetracked with this idea of college, but this, I believe this, that this non-linear path in my life has been great. I've met just the same number of people I probably would have met. Actually, I probably met more people than if I had just stayed as an engineer. Okay, I have. If you ask me in terms of the type of clients I've had and the type of consulting I can do, I'm a jack of all trades. I understand what it takes to talk semiconductor talk, and I can talk fashion, right? And I can talk anything in between: retail, banking, airlines, gaming, AI, you name it. I've got clients. And why? Because I've had such what I call a mosaic, a diversity of experiences. And I have a saying I like to give and share people, and that is strive for breadth over depth. Breadth will uncover passion, and passion will naturally drive depth. So the whole idea is, look, cast a wide net, try a lot of different things, especially as you're young. And you're going to gravitate towards the things that you have more passion for. Beautiful. And the things that you have more passion for, naturally, you're going to get more nerdy and you're going to get deeper in those things, and you'll eventually become an expert at it. But if you choose too soon to go down one narrow path, maybe you hit the jackpot and you pick the right thing, but honestly, it's probably more likely that you're going to at some point get bored, or you're going to just go through a routine, and it's not necessarily something that you're all that passionate about. You might make good money there, but you might feel a little bit trapped too, because you don't think there's anything else. So my whole advice is, look, especially if you're young, don't feel like you have to go through a linear path. Everything you're doing, even whatever you're doing at this moment, is probably something you can learn for if you have the right mindset. I'm sure you've had authors and people come talk about the idea of growth mindset. Well, growth mindset is literally being able to appreciate the moment you're in right now.
Beautiful.
Okay? Yeah? And that's about growth mindset, is being able to say, okay, what is it about this moment that actually I should gain or grow from, and be open to that learning? Another part of growth mindset is also realizing that you don't know everything, and you shouldn't try to know everything. And the more you try to impress people, the more you close yourself up from learning from others. So, and I know you're all about that, because that's what the whole podcast is about. But so that's my main advice to folks: is don't necessarily go for that linear path. It's too early. And I think some of the best and a lot of the great ideas are actually done not by people who are deep experts at something. They're actually done by people who are they know a little about this and a little about that. They go, they're doing that over here. I wonder if that would work over here. Maybe that idea over here seems totally unrelated to this idea, but what if I put it? Oh my God, that actually works, right? So it's this idea of the mashup. I think a lot of great innovation happens because people with different experiences, different points of view come in and they say, well, this is kind of like, oftentimes, like, it's funny, I was in apparel, and we would talk about how one of the biggest ideas, I remember being interviewed by the CFO, and he talked about inventory turns. He talked about how really is, one of the key metrics of being a successful apparel company is to be able to turn your inventory quickly. Okay? And then I looked at it, I go, you know what? What's so unique about apparel? It's like produce. You go, what do you mean apparel and produce? They're so different. I go, not really. What we sell is perishable. Okay? So the idea of produce, the longer you keep lettuce around in the refrigerator, at some point it's going to spoil, right? Bananas don't last for 50 years. They last for, a month or two, maybe not a year. They turn black, right? Same thing with clothing. The longer it sits on the shelf, the value continues to fall and fall and fall. And that's why we go into the stores and there's always the sale rack, right?
Yeah.
And if something's on the sale rack for longer than 2 weeks, then it's the Uber sale rack, right? Where you go from 30% to like it's 80% off, and so it's the same thing. And so a lot of the stuff I learned in managing selling produce can be reapplied to actually selling clothing. And no one thought about that, but it's like I sold perishables. So in produce, I'm selling perishables in clothing because that's what the majority of clothing, except for I think there's certain items that sort of stand the test of time, like some of the iconic like purses and there's certain things that like purses, they can be very iconic and they go up in value, but the majority of things, they go out of fashion so fast. And if you don't sell them, if it's last season's, that's last season, right? So anyway, my whole advice to your audience is strive for breadth over depth.
Over depth, yes.
Breadth will uncover the passion, and passion will drive that depth for you naturally.
Beautiful. So I have a question for this. Everybody was given an eye, two eyes, right, to see things. But you were able to make sense of things, see the patterns, and how things are connected, right? Can you teach us, what the secrets happening in the way that you see, observing, so that you will be able to capture the differences, see the patterns, and make sense of things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this rocket science. I think there's probably two things that make it, that give you the capability of this idea of pattern recognition. First is just a desire to have things better. And I think we all naturally have that. How could this be better? How could that be better? Now, I'll say this. There are a lot of people trapped in what's wrong, or who's wrong, and they spend a lot of their energy blaming things, blaming situations, blaming people, blaming the world. And so nothing's ever perfect, and everything is not good enough, and everyone has issues. And I think that's a trap. That's a trap. If you have that type of energy and mindset where you're always critical of everything, you will never be able to find patterns, because all you're going to do is just find fault. Okay? Right? You have to have the opposite, which is, okay, this isn't working. How might it work? Okay, something's not there. How might I fix it? How might I improve it? So you have to have this idea of sort of this tinkering mindset. Okay? So it's not about finding faults. Like, okay, you might say what's not working about it, but then, okay, now that I understand what's not working about it, how might I fix it? Or what else could I do with it? Or, well, now that I understand that, can I do a workaround? Or can I avoid it? Or whatever. But it's always with the intent of, how do I improve? So that's first. And you have to have it. And not everyone does. Or it's not natural for everybody. Second thing is not only this idea of, how can I improve? It's like, okay, it's a question of, how might I improve it? And what is this kind of like that? So it's like, what in this situation is kind of like, and how did I solve that in the past? And it's almost there used to be this TV show, my wife loved it, I watched it as a kid, you may not know about it, but there was this guy on TV, and he was the most resourceful, innovative guy, and he would take whatever's in the room and somehow be able to build a rocket ship or something. His name was MacGyver. I don't know if you ever heard of MacGyver?
No.
Okay. So look up MacGyver. This guy basically was your every average day guy, but he could take like some bubble gum and the wrapper on the bubble gum that was, kind of the silver wrapper, conductive, and in that somehow create a bomb, and he would escape these situations. And anyway, he was the most creative and innovative innovator you'd ever find, practical innovator, right? You almost have to have that mindset of, okay, with what I have, how might I stitch it together? And the idea of being just resourceful. So if you have a positive mindset in terms of the desire to fix things, and you have this idea of being just resourceful, like, hey, okay, well, let's try this or try that or try different things, and it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be perfect, then you're going to be very likely somebody who can be an innovator. And then I think the only other thing you have to think about is, okay, how might I share this with other people so they could actually benefit? And to be a good author, it's like, well, how do I do it in both two ways? A very simple principle or idea of framework. So in other words, taking all that complexity and making it a very simple rule, okay? And then what are a couple stories that I can tell you that bring that rule to life? If you can do those two things, you can be a great author. Finding simple rules or principles that, disparate things have, and then being able to storytell them. If you can do those things, you can be a great author.
Beautiful, beautiful. So go back to your high school time. You have a love for fashions, right? And then got fascinated by your family's friends, husband who's electrical engineer, and then you got into the engineering world, but you didn't love it. You love the fashion. You get back on to VF and do the work that you love, but then you decided to leave and starting something new again. So soon tell us, why did you decide to leave VF and leave your dream works and starting your own solo again?
So in all my keynotes when I talk, I actually talk about one of the things I'm most famous for, which is I show a scorecard, okay? And in the scorecard, I talk about numbers. And it starts off with, 5, and then it goes to 6, and then it goes to 30, and then it goes to 300, okay? So 5 is the number of times I had a career restart, okay? Career restart doesn't mean, a recruiter called me and said, hey, I have this new job opportunity, you might want to, it's a different function or a different industry. Those 5 represent the times I actually got fired. Okay? So I've been fired 5 times in my life. I'll come back to you and answer your question about VF in a second. So 5 times I got fired. 6 times I've had businesses that I created, I started, dissolve, meaning they went belly up. No more, right? 30 is the number of new products that I've launched that were unsuccessful. That didn't see the light of day, that were, some of them were like $30 million projects, right? 300 is a score you might not appreciate as much in Ho Chi Minh, but in the US it's a big deal. 300 for most people versus 5, 6, and 30 seems like such a big number, but in reality, by the way, I also have another number that's really bad, which is, I think it's 7 or 6 or 7, but it's the number of layoffs I've had to do with my friends and my people that I cared about who joined this company, and because I had these businesses dissolved, I had to lay them off, right? And so I turned friends into enemies. It's not a good, you feel bad about that. So I've had a lot of failure, but the biggest failure I always share is that 300. And people think of it as a big number. It's actually a small number. It's my credit score. In the U.S., people are given a credit score to talk about their credit worthiness to either get a car loan or buy a house. And most people have credit scores 700 or 800. And very few people have under 500. 300 is the lowest you can score in the U.S., and only 0.1% of the U.S. has ever scored 300, and I'm part of that group. I've scored it twice. Okay. Now, the reason I share all this is a lot of times life isn't by design, right? At VF, I basically got laid off. I got fired. Now, it wasn't a direct firing. Like, there were other jobs where it was clear I was getting fired. This one was the situation is I had done all this new work, and I'd done this, led a lot of large corporate initiatives, and had a very good relationship, obviously, with my boss and his boss, which was the CEO. And I felt very much at home there. However, the new CEO coming in, okay, Um, for whatever reason, I was never able to win him over. Okay, and I knew that, and it was very public knowledge. And I share this on the podcast because I don't feel like there's anything I need to hide about this, right? And he was being groomed to be the new CEO. It was very clear he had moved all the way from California to where we were in North Carolina, and he became the second in command of the company. And it was just a matter of time, like within less than a year, that he was going to take on the role of CEO. And so I asked both my boss and the CEO who I was close to, is there really a future here for me? And they said, we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you. They came up with a few ideas, but each time they met up with certain resistance, because no matter what role it was, I would still have to work under the new CEO who didn't have much favor for me, okay? And so at some point, I think I looked the old CEO in the face and said, come on, just be honest with me. Is there really a role for me? And he goes, I don't think so. So that's why I left a company I love to death, I still love to death, is because, at some point you overstay your welcome, and I was at that point.
Wow. How do you feel?
And so that was part of the 5 career restarts. It used to be 4, but now the numbers increased to 5, meaning I got fired 5 times.
But soon, I think that the new path you're creating now have a lot more impact to a lot more, like a wider, audience and the people under your influence. How do you feel, with the new journey, the new calling that you respond to?
Well, I mean, I think that's wonderful, but I felt like at BF I had a great impact there too. I think you don't know what life's going to throw at you, and so sometimes you just, like, if you have that growth mindset, you will make do with it. It doesn't mean that after I left there weren't moments of panic, like what am I going to do, or or I watched this book and I need to have people hire me now. What do I do there? These are all things you have to learn, and it's not always an easy road. But I'll say this, if you persevere and you apply yourself, and you remain optimistic and you have that right attitude, over time people will recognize you for that, and you will be able to, I think, reap the rewards of that effort. I do think effort matters at the end of the day, effort and intention of that effort, right? The other thing I say is, because I'm such an expert at failure, and people ask me a lot about that, and I do a lot of talks about how do you actually create competitive advantage through failure. But one of the things I always tell people is, when you go through hardship in life, think of it this way. If we were to write a book about Ha, would we write about all his successes? Maybe it'd take a chapter or 2, but it'd be kind of boring. What we want to know is, when you hit adversity, how you overcame that, and how that adversity then inspired you to those great successes that you had. And so I always say, every time something, like for me, what happened is I had gone to Europe for VF and worked in the European office and had done very well there, and actually gotten a promotion. I was going to lead up 5 functions and report directly to the head of Europe. And it's really exciting, and they had actually even announced it to the European team. But the new soon-to-be CEO got wind of this, and he killed it. And I had already put my house on sale. I was, everything was already in motion, right? And it was like, pull the plug, and it was pretty much a clear sign to the rest of the organization. You don't want to invest in this person because he's going nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And I have an executive coach, and he called. We talked to each other, and I said, "Oh, well, this." He goes, "Guess what, Soon? This is a new chapter that you'll be able to now have in your own book. And what just happened to you is epic. EPIC, epic. So when something bad happens, think of it as, this is something epic that I'm going to someday share in a podcast, or tell other people, or tell my kids about. And it'll be a great story about what I did when all hell broke loose, when the poop hit the fan. What did I do?" And it creates that excitement and the suspense, and it makes for a great story. And who wants to die and at your eulogy during the funeral, people talk about, and he did this, and he did that, and then he did that? Boring. They want to talk about, this is crazy guy. And then, one time I met him, and, he was drunk, and he was so depressed, and then, 2 years later, he's like, at Bryant Park doing a talk on his book. What's up with that? They want to talk about the epic part of your life. And that's what you want to be remembered for, not the fact that you are a good student, a good father, and a good community leader. The wrinkles make you cool. So, have a few pimples, have a few wrinkles. It's having things that are epic make your life full.
Beautiful. Thanks, Boone. I have two last questions for the conversation today. Okay. And the first question is about thinking, because my wife and I, we've been on the quest to help people to improve their ability to think by simply asking experts like you, how have you been helping yourself to expand your ability to think?
Yeah, I'll share something that is probably atypical. I mean, you're going to get a lot of expertise around, how to think better and all that. The one thing I would ask you to think about in terms of expanding your thinking is put a question to yourself in a very positive, not in like a heavy way, but in a positive way. Like, how if before you go to bed, ask yourself, how might I do whatever I'm trying to do? And especially if I had all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, or in fact, I had a magic wand and I could do anything I want, okay? And then, well, two things. The time before you sleep, sometimes you have a great imagination. And you'll be surprised that sometimes when you sleep, you come up with ideas and solutions. Put a notepad by your bed and write them down when you wake up. Like, hey, I came up with this interesting new solution or this new business idea. And, sometimes, oh, God, these are really stupid. But sometimes you'll come up with some of your best, craziest, funnest ideas during both the time before you fall asleep and when you dream. And write them down when you wake up.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So the last question is about the future. So we knew the second grade soon wanted to become a U.S. president, but and then it couldn't happen. Then eventually you want to become a rock stars and different things, right? Get into the engineering world, love fashion, get back to the fashion, now become a book author, a speaker, and a consultant. So heading into the future a little bit, is there anything that you are working on that you are exciting and soon want you to share with us, so together we can celebrate with you in advance?
Well, yeah, I have a few projects, but I think the one idea that I've been embracing more, and it started at the end of, and it was probably spawned on by the pandemic, but at the end of 2021, as we were coming into 22, you know how you do New Year's resolutions, right? And I found that New Year's resolutions were things that either I did for a little while, like the first month or two, I'm going to exercise, blah, blah, whatever, or there are things that I just never finished, right? And I said, I want to pick one where I think I can do it and do it consistently, and it wouldn't be so hard to do. And the resolution I gave to myself at the end of 21, as we went into 22, that I continued this year was find more joy. That's it. Okay? And so it shaped a lot of the decisions I made throughout 22. Is this going to bring me more joy? No. Okay, who cares? Yeah, make enough to live on, sure, pay the bills. But outside of that, is it going to really, if it's about making more money and I'm not going to get more joy out of it, forget it. If there's more joy and I don't make much money, okay, as long as I cover my bills, I'm okay, right? And so this idea of have more joy and enjoy things more. And so it helps with both the decision making. And I think the other thing that is really important, we talked about this too earlier in the conversation, is this idea of if you can appreciate the small things in life, both from a growth mindset point of view, but if you can also appreciate the small things in life, you have opportunities to have joy every single day of your life.
True. Wow. So thanks a lot for spending your time with me and the audience today. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you sharing your own journey with a lot of beautiful advice about, the breadth versus the depth, right? And a lot of, things that you share in here. The most important I see in here also is about finding joy, enjoy life, because that is something at the end of the day is not how much, we have or whatever it is, but the journey we've been enjoying it is with the people that we love is very important. And so I wish that you're gonna enjoy every single moment now forward with the people, with your family, with friends, with colleagues, with clients, with whatever that you are doing, and share with other more so that they can enjoy and find joy in what they're doing also. So thanks a lot for sharing. Thanks a lot, and I hope in February I'll be able to invite you for a cup of coffee in San Francisco. All right?
Yeah, let me know. Yes.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful. Today is February 1st. There, I have a wonderful starting of the month. Enjoy 2023. See you in February. Okay, in the end of the month.
Okay.
Bye.
Nice to talk. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.